Hey everyone, name's Sean. Gonna go ahead and start my presentation for ISA 4220 on HTTP and HTTPS and apparmor. All right, let's get started. So here's the rundown. Basically, apparmor summary for it is that it's a MAC or a mandatory access control, which is a security model, and it's used to tie in access control attributes to programs rather than to users. And summary for HTTP, HTTPS is that it's used to transfer information over packets on a network. And the main difference between HTTPS is that it's more secure than HTTP. Okay. So a little bit more about apparmor. We're going to get a little bit more in detail. So I already told you it was a mandatory access control. Basically what it does is it takes programs and limits their access. Okay. Only users who have access can actually access the program behind the apparmor. It's kind of the point. It's really what it's designed to do. It's like a basic protection layer that you can put on things you want to protect on your computer. I know it has two modes. It has an enforcement mode and a complaints mode. Enforcement enforces the policies and makes a report on them if any of the policies are broken. Meanwhile, complaint only reports on the policies that are being broken, does nothing to actually stop anyone from doing anything. It's simply just to report on it. Alright, moving on is apparmor continued. You actually have to enable apparmor on startup. So if you ever enable it, you have to restart your application. You need to make sure the rules are configured properly for what you want to do. You also, if it's doing something maybe you don't want to do, then you need to get rid of that. It doesn't really just come pre-installed based on your preferences. There are a lot of maintenance that you have to keep up on those. But other than that, it's basically as simple and basic as a security model can get. There's not really much more to it than that. Alright, let's move on. More interesting topic to me personally is HTTP. So Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or as the cool kids call it, HTTP. It's an application layer protocol that's used to transfer information or packets of information across a network. Yeah, it's basically just a protocol. It's how a computer identifies what's happening, what you're doing. A good example of this, I'm sure everyone's seen it, when you go to a website like faggostraps.com, it uses HTTP, not HTTPS, so that means you might think to yourself, well, wait, isn't it not secure? Well, it really depends on what you're doing on the site. Does it really need to be secure? What are you doing on faggostraps.com that needs protection? Yeah, it uses port 80. When a computer receives information from an HTTP, and if it's coming from port 80, it just basically knows that's what it is. It kind of helps things run a little bit faster. If it sees any information over port 80, it just knows it's HTTP right away. Doesn't really have to do anything else about it. All applications are configured to receive information that way. Alright, let's move on to HTTPS. It's basically just a more secure version of HTTP. It's what the S stands for at the end. It's Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure. Basically all it does is encrypt the traffic using an SSL socket, secure socket layer. Basically if anyone tries to sniff the packet that's going in between the websites, they'll just get a bunch of gibberish that they can't understand, they can't read it, so they won't know what you're doing. So you may think to yourself, okay, well, why isn't everyone just using HTTPS? It just seems like a better version of HTTP in every way. Well, while it is more secure, it does have its drawbacks. A good example I found is that, let's say you're hosting an HTTPS site that will require a unique IP for each site, because that's what HTTPS requires. It requires a unique IP. If I'm hosting, or your provider, and you have 1,000 sites on a server, I'd rather use one IP than 1,000 IPs. So So that's more of a convenience issue, although it really would depend. If they're doing something like, banks, then you might want to deal with it and go with HTTPS anyway. Plus, I think they have to. Another downside HTTPS can have, that can cause a higher strain on the CPU and cause the site to run slower. And if you're a meme website and you don't care how fast it runs for the most part, so you might just do HTTP. But for the most part, most places you'll go will have HTTPS if it's a reliable website, if you've heard of it, that sort of thing. And that pretty much does it for me. Thanks for watching to the end. I'm surprised you did. Alright, well, I'll see you guys on the flip side.